Victorian bakers cooked up death with every loaf. They worked in sweltering underground caverns, breathing coal dust and flour for 18-hour shifts, and still had to walk for miles delivering bread afterward. The average baker died at 42 years old, and yet, without them, Victorian Britain's Industrial Revolution would have collapsed from hunger. It makes you wonder, how did anyone survive making the very thing that kept everyone else alive? So yeah, if these stories work for you, subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Comment below. Last week, someone from Canada said they listened during lunch breaks. Not judging, just wasn't expecting that. Okay, tonight it's Victorian bakeries in the 1870s. But before we go anywhere, get cozy. Like, actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. So congratulations, you just woke up in a Victorian bakehouse in Birmingham, 1875. It's 11 o'clock at night and your day is just beginning. The tiny underground room is lit by a single flickering gas lamp casting long shadows across walls stained black with decades of coal soot. The air feels thick enough to chew, a mix of damp heat and flour dust that coats your lungs with every breath. Not like the clean air flowing through your bedroom right now. Your back aches from sleeping on a thin sack of flour thrown over wooden boards, your makeshift bed for the 2-hour nap you managed between shifts. Your mouth tastes of yesterday's coal dust, your eyes sting, and your hands are cracked and bleeding from handling scorching hot trays and harsh lye soap. Welcome to the life of a Victorian journeyman baker, a job considered more deadly than working in the mines. The foreman, a burly man with forearms like Christmas hams, is already shouting orders as 3 other bleary-eyed men stumble into the bakehouse. Swift, Foster, get that bloody oven lit. Harpreet, start the sponge. New boy, haul those sacks. He points at you with a finger missing its top joint. Lost to a bread peel years ago. 20 stone of flour tonight. The factories need double for morning shift. 20 stone. That's 280 pounds of flour you'll be kneading by hand before dawn. For a moment you consider running, but where would you go? In 1875, losing your position means starvation or the workhouse. Neither option is appealing, so instead you shuffle toward the corner where massive burlap sacks of flour are stacked against the wall. "Bloody hell, it's freezing in here," mutters a skinny young man with hollow cheeks as he struggles to light the coal-fired oven. "Just wait," replies the older baker beside him. "In an hour you'll be sweating like a sinner in church." He's not wrong. Victorian bakehouses were cruel masterpieces of thermal torture, freezing cold when you arrived but soon transformed into sweltering chambers that routinely reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The coal-fired ovens radiated heat into spaces with no ventilation, creating conditions that would violate every modern workplace safety law. "Move it," the foreman cracks a towel near your ear. "Those sacks won't walk themselves." You heave the first sack onto your shoulder, knees buckling under the weight. It feels like carrying a small child, a very dense, very heavy small child made of finely milled wheat. The rough burlap scratches your neck as you stagger across the room and drop it beside the massive wooden kneading trough. Flour puffs up in a cloud, settling on your face and hair. By morning, you'll look like you've aged 50 years, dusted white like some ghoulish spectre. The skinny baker, you learn his name is Duncan, has managed to get the fire roaring. The orange glow illuminates his face, showing eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and the perpetual flour dust. He's maybe 25, but looks 40. "How long you been baking?" he asks, not looking away from the flames. 3 months, you reply, returning for another sack. "Won't make it to Christmas," he says flatly. "Most don't." He wasn't being cruel, just stating facts. The statistics were brutal. In the 1870s, a baker's average life expectancy was just 42 years if they survived apprenticeship. Lung diseases from flour dust, burns, physical exhaustion, and injuries from heavy lifting took a devastating toll. The combination of sleep deprivation and dangerous equipment created a recipe for disaster that claimed countless lives. "Right, you lazy bastards," the foreman claps his hands. "Sponge needs starting now if we're to meet morning deliveries." The sponge was the first stage in bread making, a mixture of flour, water, and yeast left to ferment before being made into dough. In better bakeries, the foreman would have come in earlier to set this up. In this Birmingham bakehouse, like most urban establishments, cutting corners was standard practice. Harpreet, a bearded man with powerful shoulders, dumps yeast into a smaller trough, then adds water and a portion of flour. "American flour tonight," he grunts. "Shipped in from the bloody colonies, makes for a stronger dough but hell on the arms." By the 1870s, British bakeries were increasingly reliant on imported American wheat. Cheaper and with higher gluten content, it produced stretchier dough, good for bread, punishing to mix by hand. American wheat fields and British railways had combined to transform baking from a local craft to an industrial process. Not that the technology had reached most bakehouses yet. The coal fire's heat begins to permeate the room as you finish hauling the last of the flour sacks. Already sweat trickles down your spine, soaking the rough cotton shirt. There's no rest though. Immediately you're set to sifting flour, pushing it through wire mesh to remove debris. In the flickering light, you occasionally spot weevils, small stones, or unidentifiable dark specks that you quietly flick away. "What's that you're pitching?" The foreman appears suddenly at your shoulder. "Just some bugs," you stammer. He laughs, a harsh barking sound. "Bugs? Boy, that's just extra protein. During the cotton famine, we'd have killed for weevils. Adds flavour." This wasn't exaggeration. Food purity was a foreign concept in many Victorian bakeries. When profit margins were razor-thin and competition brutal, nothing went to waste. The notion that customers might object to insects in their bread was seen as laughably squeamish. As the night deepens, the real work begins. The sponge has fermented, bubbling with yeast activity, and now it's time to mix the main dough. This is when you discover what true physical labour means. The four of you gather around the massive wooden trough, a vessel that looks like a giant coffin, as Harpreet pours in the sponge. Then comes the rest of the flour, more water and salt. "Get in there and mix," orders the foreman. Literally, in many Victorian bakeries, including this one, bakers used their bare feet to mix dough when quantities were large. You and Duncan kick off your boots, roll up your trousers, and climb into the trough. The cool, sticky dough squishes between your toes as you begin walking through it, pushing and turning the mass. It's oddly satisfying at first, like stomping in mud puddles as a child. 20 minutes later, satisfaction has given way to exhaustion. Your calves burn with the effort of moving through the increasingly stiff dough. Sweat pours down your face, dripping into the mixture below. No one comments on this. Baker's sweat in bread was so common that Victorian food writer Eliza Acton specifically mentioned the torrents of perspiration that inevitably ended up in each loaf. "Enough," calls the foreman eventually. "Get it on the bench for kneading." This is when the real punishment begins. The dough, now a cohesive mass weighing over 300 pounds, must be pulled from the trough and divided for hand kneading. Each baker takes a portion weighing about 50 pounds, heaving it onto floured wooden benches along the wall. Kneading dough is an art. It's also, when done on this scale, brutally physical work. You push with your palms, fold the dough, turn it, and repeat thousands of times. Your shoulders scream in protest. Blisters form, then pop on your palms. The dough sticks to your hands, pulling at your skin with each movement. "Put your back into it, lad," shouts the foreman. "That gluten won't develop itself." The science of gluten development wasn't fully understood in the 1870s, but bakers knew that proper kneading created better bread. They just didn't have machines to do the work. Instead, human muscle power transformed flour and water into the elastic dough that would eventually become crusty loaves. After an hour of kneading, your arms feel like overcooked pudding. Every muscle trembles with fatigue. But there's no rest. The clock is ticking toward morning deliveries. The dough is divided again, this time into 4-pound lumps that will become standard loaves. "Shape 'em quick," barks the foreman. "First batch needs to be in the oven in 10 minutes. This is where skill matters more than strength. Your fingers, despite their fatigue, must form each lump into a tight ball, creating surface tension that will help the bread rise properly. It's delicate work done at breakneck speed. Any loaf shaped poorly will bake into a misshapen mess and come out of your wages. By 2 a.m., the bakehouse has reached its full infernal potential. The temperature hovers around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is a thick soup of flour dust, coal smoke, and sweat. Every breath feels like drinking hot soup. Your shirt is plastered to your back, completely soaked through. Duncan, working beside you, suddenly sways on his feet. Before anyone can react, he crumples to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. "Not again," sighs Harpreet, barely looking up from his shaping. "Drag him to the corner," orders the foreman. "Splash some water on him. We can't fall behind." This wasn't uncommon. Heat exhaustion and fainting were regular occurrences in Victorian bakehouses. With no ventilation, workers frequently collapsed from the combination of heat, exertion, and the carbon monoxide from coal fires. Some never woke up. You help Harpreet move Duncan to a slightly cooler corner where a splash of water from a bucket brings him around. His eyes flutter open, unfocused at first. "How long was I out?" he mumbles. 2 minutes, replies Harpreet. "New record for staying on your feet, though. Made it till 2 this time." Duncan staggers upright, still wobbly. "Can't afford to rest. Got a sister and her kids depending on me." The brutal economics of Victorian baking meant there was no sick leave, no workers' compensation. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. And in the 1870s, a baker's weekly wage of perhaps 20 shillings was barely enough to keep a family fed. Missing even a single shift could mean hunger. Back at the shaping bench, the first batches of dough have risen enough to go into the oven. This brings a new danger, the massive wooden peel, a flat shovel-like tool used to place loaves in the blazing hot oven. "Watch yourself," warns Harpreet as the foreman slides the first batch in. "Old Bill lost 3 fingers on that peel last year, crushed them between the handle and the oven arch." Workplace accidents were so common in Victorian bakeries that most workers bore scars or missing digits. With no safety regulations and exhausted workers handling dangerous equipment in poorly lit conditions, injuries were inevitable. Burns from the 500-degree oven were particularly common and could easily become infected in the unsanitary conditions. By 3 a.m, the first loaves are coming out of the oven, crusty golden brown oblongs that release a tantalizing aroma as they're stacked on cooling racks. The smell momentarily makes your exhaustion worthwhile. There's something primal and satisfying about transforming simple ingredients into food. "Don't get too attached," says Harpreet, noticing your admiration. "These ain't for folk like us. Factory workers get these. 6pence a loaf." He's right. Though you're making the staff of life, as a baker in 1870s Birmingham, you could barely afford to buy what you produced. Most bakers lived on damaged loaves, stale returns, or the cheapest brown bread, ironically healthier than the white bread prized by wealthier Victorians, though no one knew it then. The night grinds on. Batch after batch is shaped, risen, baked and cooled. Your world narrows to a cycle of burning heat, aching muscles, and the endless demands of the clock. There's no conversation now. Everyone is too exhausted to speak. Communication happens in grunts and gestures. Around 4 a.m., the foreman announces a brief rest while the final batch proves. 20 minutes, he says, not a second more. This is the baker's pitch, a short sleep taken on whatever surface is available. You collapse onto a pile of empty flour sacks thrown over the kneading trough, not caring about the hard wood beneath. Duncan and Harpreet do the same, falling asleep almost instantly. The foreman remains awake, watching the clock with bloodshot eyes. Sleep comes like a hammer blow, deep and instant. Your dreams are confused, falling into vast troughs of dough, suffocating under mountains of flour. It feels like you've barely closed your eyes when rough hands shake you awake. Up, final batch needs loading. Your body screams in protest as you force yourself upright. Every joint feels filled with ground glass. Your hands are swollen, blistered in places, cracked and bleeding in others, but there's no time for self-pity. The rhythm of the bakehouse waits for no one. The eastern sky is beginning to lighten as the final loaves come out of the oven, but the workday is far from over. Now comes the delivery, loading baskets, carts and wagons with fresh bread to be distributed throughout the city before breakfast. New boy takes the factory route today, announces the foreman. 30 loaves, Soho works. They start at 6 sharp, be late and we lose the contract. Your heart sinks. The Soho Works is nearly 3 miles away and you'll be carrying a basket weighing almost 100 pounds. After a night of labour that would break most modern workers, you now face an urban hike with a crushing load. Better get moving, says Harpreet sympathetically. Factory routes the worst. Take Bridge Street, less chance of the street Arabs nicking a loaf. Street Arabs was Victorian slang for homeless children who would sometimes steal food from delivery boys. You couldn't really blame them. Hunger was a constant companion for many in industrial Birmingham, but a stolen loaf would come out of your already meagre wages. As you load your delivery basket, Duncan appears beside you, face grey with exhaustion but eyes surprisingly kind. Here, he says quietly, slipping a small loaf into your pocket. For the road, you'll need it. This small act of kindness, sharing food in a world of scarcity, was how many Victorian workers survived. Despite brutal competition, bakers often formed tight bonds, looking out for each other in a system designed to grind them down. Outside, the pre-dawn air feels shockingly cool after the inferno of the bakehouse. Your sweat-soaked clothes instantly chill you to the bone, but the heavy basket on your back will soon have you overheating again. The streets are not yet fully awake. A few early workers, night soil men finishing their rounds, the occasional police constable eyeing you suspiciously. This was the baker's twilight world, working while others slept, delivering the day's bread as the city slowly stirred to life. As you trudge toward the factory district, the weight of the basket already making your shoulders burn, you reflect on the brutal irony of your situation. Without you and thousands like you, Victorian Britain would starve. The Industrial Revolution, with its factories and mines, ran on the energy provided by bread. Yet those who made this essential food were among the most abused workers in the empire, broken by exhaustion, disease and poverty. The average baker in 1875 would be dead before age 45, having spent a life in underground rooms breathing flour dust and coal smoke. The rising sun catches on factory chimneys ahead as you adjust your heavy load. Another day in Victorian Birmingham begins. For you, it's already halfway done. Tonight, you'll do it all again, and the next night, and the next. Such was the life of a Victorian baker, making the food that fed a nation, one exhausting loaf at a time. As the sun breaks over the horizon, painting the smoke-stained buildings in golden light, you find yourself wondering how long you'll survive in this profession that devours its own. The statistics aren't encouraging, but then again, someone has to beat the odds. Maybe it will be you. Or maybe, like so many others, you'll become just another casualty of the Victorian bakehouse. Forgotten by history, your life spent feeding others until it burned away like flour in a too-hot oven. The factory whistle at Soho Works pierces the morning air, calling workers to their stations. You quicken your pace despite screaming muscles. Bread must be delivered. The great machine of industrial Britain must be fed. And tomorrow it all begins again in the sweltering flour-dusted darkness of 11 p.m. The workers at Soho Works swarm around you like hungry ants as you set down your basket of bread. 30 men in soot-stained clothes, their faces already streaked with factory grime despite the early hour, hands outstretched with coins. These are the lucky ones, factory workers with steady wages enough to afford a fresh loaf each day. "Back up, you animals," shouts the factory foreman, a whip-thin man with a magnificent moustache. "Form a bloody queue or none of you eats." They shuffle into a ragged line, eyeing the bread with naked hunger. The average factory worker in 1870s Birmingham burned through thousands of calories daily, working 12-hour shifts at punishing physical labour. Bread wasn't just food, it was fuel, the coal that kept human machines running. "4 pence, you say to the first man, holding out a crusty loaf. He drops the coins into your palm without a word, snatches the bread, and immediately tears off a chunk with his teeth. By the time he walks away, half the loaf is gone. One by one, they pay and take their bread. Some wrap it carefully in cloth, saving it for later. Others devour it on the spot, cramming huge mouthfuls between cracked lips. The bond between these men and bread is primal. Nothing fancy, no delicate appreciation of crust or crumb, just desperate need. "You're new," says the factory foreman as the last worker shuffles away. "Where's old Pete?" You shrug. "Don't know any Pete, just started this week." The foreman grunts. "Figured. Pete had been delivering here 3 years, didn't show up Monday, probably dead. Baker's lung finally got him." He says this casually, like commenting on the weather. "You don't look strong enough to last half as long." With your empty basket, you begin the long walk back to the bakery. Your legs feel like they're filled with lead, muscles trembling with each step. The city is fully awake now, streets crowded with carts, horses and people. The smoke from 1,000 chimneys blots out the morning sun, cast in a perpetual twilight over the industrial districts. Welcome to the workshop of the world, grimy, loud and relentless. By the time you reach the bakehouse, it's nearly 9 in the morning. Your 10-hour shift should be over, but as you descend the steps into the basement bakery, you know better than to expect relief. Sure enough, the foreman meets you at the door, face glistening with sweat, eyes bloodshot from the night's labour. "Good, you're back. We've got a special order. 50 fancy rolls for the tea shop on Chester Street. Get to it." Your heart sinks. No rest. No sleep, just more dough, more heat, more pain. "But I've been up since—" "Did I ask for your bloody life story?" the foreman snaps. 50 rolls, now, or find yourself another position. This was the reality for journeyman bakers. Shifts that stretched to 16, 18, even 20 hours when demand was high. Labour laws that protected factory workers simply didn't apply to bakeries. There was always another desperate man willing to take your place if you complained. Back at the bench, you find Harpreet still working, his dark beard now white with flour dust. He looks up briefly as you take your place beside him. "Factory route went all right then?" he asks, hands never stopping as he shapes small pieces of dough into perfect rounds. "Yeah, sold every loaf." "Good. Always worry about new lads on that route. Had a boy last year got robbed at knife point, lost every penny and had to pay it back. Took him months." As you begin working the dough for rolls, your hands scream in protest. The blisters from the night's work have hardened into painful calluses. Your fingers feel swollen to twice their normal size, but there's a rhythm to the work that becomes almost meditative. Fold, press, turn, repeat. Your mind detaches from your body, floating above the pain. "Master wants to see you," calls the foreman after you've shaped about 20 rolls. "Office, now." The master baker, owner of this establishment, rarely appeared in the bakehouse itself. He occupied a small office above ground where flour dust didn't settle on his fine waistcoat. You wipe your hands on your apron and climb the stairs, wondering what you've done wrong. The office is shockingly different from the hellish bakery below. Clean, relatively cool, with actual daylight filtering through a small window. The master sits behind a desk, a corpulent man with mutton chop whiskers and a watch chain stretched tight across his ample belly. Next to him stands a thin, nervous-looking man clutching a leather case. "This the new one?" asks the master, barely looking at you. "Yes, sir," you reply, awkwardly touching your forelock in the expected gesture of deference. "Good. Listen carefully, boy. Mr. Parsons here is our supplier of quality improvers. You'll be working with him today. Special batch." The master's eyes finally meet yours hard as flint. "And I don't need to tell you that what happens in my bakehouse stays in my bakehouse, understood?" A chill runs down your spine. Despite the perpetual heat of the building, you've heard rumours about quality improvers, the adulterants that less scrupulous bakers added to their bread, but you never expected to be directly involved. "Yes, sir," you mutter, "because what choice do you have?" "Excellent. Mr. Parsons will instruct you. Remember, tight lips mean continued employment." Back in the bakehouse, Mr. Parsons opens his leather case on a corner table, revealing several paper packages and small bottles. The foreman clears everyone else out, sending them on deliveries or to clean the storage room. Soon, it's just you, Parsons, and the omnipresent heat of the ovens. "You ever worked with improvers before, boy?" asks Parsons, his voice unexpectedly refined for such a shabby-looking man. "No, sir." "Well, it's simple enough. Bread's too expensive to make honestly these days. Competition, you understand. Every baker in Birmingham trying to undercut the others." He opens one of the paper packages, revealing a fine white powder. "This here's alum, aluminum potassium sulfate. Makes the bread nice and white, helps it hold more water too. More water means less flour needed per loaf. Less flour means more profit." He says this matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather rather than the systematic adulteration of the city's food supply. You watch in queasy fascination as he measures out portions with a small brass scale. "This one here," he continues, opening another package, "is chalk. Calcium carbonate. Bulks up the flour, makes it weigh more. Bread's sold by weight. So, isn't that cheating the customers?" you ask, immediately regretting the question. Parsons laughs, a dry sound like rustling paper. "Cheating? Boy, this is business. Everyone does it. Some use bone meal, clay, even ground beans. Alum and chalk are positively gentlemanly by comparison." The casualness with which he discusses food fraud is chilling. But he's not wrong. By the 1870s, bread adulteration was widespread. Economic pressures forced bakers to cut corners, and with no effective food safety laws, the practice flourished in the shadows. "All right," says Parsons, having measured his powders. "We've got a half-sack batch to prepare. Regular flour, but we'll enhance it with these. Makes it go further, look better. The master saves money, customers get bread they can afford, everyone wins." Except, of course, for the people eating chalk and alum with their daily bread. By the 1870s, some doctors were beginning to connect London's epidemic of rickets and digestive ailments with adulterated food, but such concerns rarely reached Birmingham's bakeries. Mixing the adulterants into the flour is unsettlingly easy. The white powders blend seamlessly, indistinguishable from the flour itself. As you knead this special batch, the dough feels slightly different, grittier, less elastic. But once baked, you doubt anyone could tell the difference by sight alone. The real trick, Parsons explains as you work, is getting the ratios right. Too much alum and people taste it. Metallic, too much chalk and the texture's off, but just the right amount. He pinches his fingers together in a chef's kiss. Perfection. Or close enough for Birmingham tastes anyway. The adulterated dough goes into the oven alongside regular loaves. While it bakes, Parsons packs up his case, leaving behind carefully labelled jars of his improvers for future use. "You did well," he says, snapping the case shut. "Not squeamish like some lads. The master will be pleased. You'll go far in this trade, if your lungs hold out, that is." He chuckles at his own dark humour and departs, leaving you alone with your complicity. When the adulterated loaves emerge from the oven, they look surprisingly good, perhaps even whiter and more attractive than the honest bread from earlier. They're set aside for a different delivery route, one serving the poorest neighbourhoods where customers care more about price than quality. "2 pence a loaf for these," says the foreman when he returns. "Half the flour, same weight, lower price. Everybody's happy. Except your conscience, which nags despite your exhaustion. But in the hierarchy of Victorian bakery needs, morality ranks far below survival. With wages of perhaps 20 shillings a week and rent for even the meanest lodgings taking half that, principles were an unaffordable luxury for most journeyman bakers. As noon approaches, a new crisis erupts. Duncan, who had gone on a delivery route after his earlier fainting spell, staggers back into the bakehouse, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Street Arabs," he gasps, collapsing onto a flour sack. "5 of them took the whole basket, 14 loaves for the boarding house on Mill Street." The foreman curses colourfully. "That's coming out of your wages, you useless sack of guts. That's 7 shillings lost." "They had knives," protests Duncan weakly. "What was I supposed to do? Fight back. Die defending the master's property if you have to." The foreman's face has turned an alarming shade of purple. "Instead, you come crawling back with nothing but excuses." This wasn't unusual. Bread theft was common in Victorian cities where hunger drove desperate acts. Delivery boys were frequent targets, especially in poorer districts. Some bakeries hired burlier men for dangerous routes, but most simply docked the wages of unfortunate victims like Duncan. "He needs a doctor," you say, looking at the blood still pulsing from Duncan's wound. The foreman laughs harshly. "Doctor? For a scratch? Back to work, both of you. We've got the afternoon batch to start." So begins the day shift, technically your second shift, though your body has long since stopped distinguishing between work periods. There's a different rhythm now. Instead of the massive batches of standard loaves made overnight, daytime baking focuses on smaller specialty items, rolls, buns, and fancy breads for middle-class tea tables. Despite your fatigue, you find this work slightly less punishing. The dough batches are smaller, the precision required offering a different kind of challenge. You're shaping delicate dinner rolls when the bakehouse door creaks open, admitting a shaft of actual daylight and a small, soot-smudged boy of perhaps 8 years. "Message for the master," he pipes, holding out a grimy piece of paper. The foreman snatches it, reads quickly, and frowns. "They want 30 bath buns by 3 o'clock. New order from the tea room on Corporation Street." Bath buns, sweet fruited breads topped with sugar nibs, were popular afternoon treats for Birmingham's growing middle class. They were also time-consuming to make, requiring ingredients not yet prepared. "We haven't started a sweet dough," protests Harpreet. "There's no currants soaked, no sugar nibs." "Then you'd better get moving," barks the foreman. "And you," he jabs a finger at the messenger boy, "wait for a reply." The boy nods, then lets his curious gaze wander around the bakehouse. His eyes widen at the sight of the massive ovens, the troughs of dough, the exhausted men working in clouds of flour dust. "You want to be a baker when you grow up, lad?" asks Duncan, noticing the boy's fascination. The child shakes his head vehemently. "No, sir. Dad says bakers all die young with rotten lungs. I'm going to be a chimney sweep." A burst of laughter erupts from the tired bakers. The irony of considering chimney sweeping a healthier alternative isn't lost on them. Yet, in some ways, the boy wasn't wrong. Chimney sweeps, for all their hardships, at least worked in the open air part of the time. Bakers spent their lives underground, breathing a toxic mix of flour dust and coal smoke. "Smart lad," wheezes Harpreet, still chuckling as he begins measuring ingredients for the bath buns. "Aim high, quite literally in your case." For the next hour, the bakehouse is a flurry of activity. Sweet dough is mixed, currants are hastily soaked, sugar nibs are crushed for topping. Despite your fatigue, there's something satisfying about creating these more elaborate treats, actual baking rather than the industrial bread production of the night shift. The messenger boy watches it all with wide eyes until the foreman shoos him away with a hastily scrawled note confirming the order. As the door closes behind him, shutting out the brief reminder that a world exists beyond these flour-dusted walls, you realize you've been awake and working for over 14 hours now. The human body isn't designed for such punishment. Your vision occasionally blurs, your hands moving on autopilot through familiar motions. Mistakes become inevitable. A tray of rolls left too long in the oven emerges charred beyond salvation. "That's 6pence off your wages," snaps the foreman. "Pay attention, damn you!" But attention is a luxury when exhaustion saturates every cell. Victorian bakers operated in a perpetual state of sleep deprivation that modern medicine would classify as torture. The resulting accidents, burns, and injuries were considered simply part of the trade. By mid-afternoon, the bath buns are finished, golden brown, studded with currants and topped with crunchy sugar nibs. They look and smell delicious, a cruel contrast to your own gnawing hunger. You haven't eaten since Duncan slipped you that small loaf hours ago. "You," the foreman points at you, "delivery to Corporation Street. Don't dawdle and don't let anyone rob you, not in that neighbourhood anyway. It's all toffs and shop girls." The prospect of leaving the bakehouse, even briefly, feels like a reprieve. You carefully pack the still warm buns into a clean delivery basket and head up the stairs into the world of the living. Outside, the summer sun is high, beating down on Birmingham's smoke-stained buildings. The contrast between the infernal bakehouse and the ordinary street life is jarring. People go about their business, shop doors stand open, a street vendor sells flowers from a colourful cart. None of them know or care about the underground world that produces their daily bread. Corporation Street is one of Birmingham's better areas, lined with fashionable shops and tea rooms catering to the middle classes. The tea room that ordered the buns has large windows displaying dainty tables where women in elaborate dresses sip from porcelain cups. This is the other face of Victorian England, not the desperate factory workers who devoured bread to fuel their labour, but the comfortable classes who enjoyed baked goods as pleasant accompaniments to social rituals. The manager who receives your delivery is a thin man with waxed moustaches and the perpetually disappointed expression of someone who considers himself better than his station. "These are late," he sniffs, inspecting the buns. "We specified 3 o'clock. It's nearly past." "Sorry, sir. Extra order. Had to make them fresh." He makes a dismissive noise. "I suppose they'll have to do, though they look rather plain. Jenkins over on New Street does a much finer bath bun, you know, glazed with apricot, very continental." You stand impassively, too tired to defend your work or explain the brutal conditions under which it was produced. The gulf between those who make and those who consume seems unbridgeable. This man, with his clean hands and ironed collar, can never understand what went into the buns he casually criticizes. After receiving payment and no tip despite the special order, you begin the walk back to the bakehouse. Your feet drag on the cobblestones, each step an effort of will. The basket feels 10 times heavier empty than it did full. A church clock strikes 4 as you pass, its sonorous tones reminding you that normal people will soon finish their workday, but not you, not any baker in industrial Birmingham. Your shift, already stretching beyond human endurance, will continue until the night's baking begins again at 11. As you descend the steps back into the underground bakehouse, the familiar wall of heat and flour dust embraces you like a toxic lover. Duncan and Harpreet are still at their stations, faces grey with fatigue, movements mechanical. The foreman prowls between them, sharp-eyed despite his own exhaustion. "Payment?" he demands, hand outstretched. You surrender the coins from the tea room, which disappear instantly into his pocket. You don't ask how much of this will actually reach the master, or whether any portion might find its way to the workers who created the goods. The answer is obvious. "Right," he says, already moving on. "Clear those benches. We've got the evening bread to start. 50 household loaves and 30 workers' loaves." Your heart sinks. No rest. No break, just more dough, more heat, more pain. This is what it meant to be a baker in Victorian England. Not the romantic image of artisanal craft, but an endless grind that consumed bodies and lives. As you mechanically begin cleaning the workbenches, scraping away dried dough and dusting with fresh flour, Harpreet appears beside you. His normally stoic face shows concern. "You need to rest," he says quietly, glancing toward the foreman who has momentarily stepped out. "You've been going since last night. Take 20 minutes in the storage room. I'll cover for you." This small kindness, the offer to risk his own position to let you rest, nearly breaks you. In a world designed to grind workers down, such moments of humanity were precious lifelines. "The foreman will notice," you protest weakly. Harpreet shakes his head. "Not if I knock over the flour bin accidentally. He'll be too busy screaming at me to count heads." Before you can argue further, he moves with surprising quickness for an exhausted man bumping hard into a sack of flour precariously balanced on the edge of a shelf. It crashes down, splitting open and sending a spectacular cloud of white dust across the bakehouse. The foreman's roar of rage is immediate. "You clumsy ox! That's 15 shillings of flour!" In the chaos that follows, you slip unnoticed into the small storage room where additional supplies are kept. Among sacks of flour and boxes of yeast, you find a relatively clean corner and sink down, your back against the cool stone wall. The relief of simply not standing is indescribable. Your eyelids feel weighted with lead, your limbs distant and disconnected. Sleep ambushes you between one breath and the next, pulling you under like a riptide. Dreams of drowning in flour consume you until rough hands shake you awake. Your 20 minutes have stretched to nearly an hour, and the foreman's face looms over you, mottled with rage. "Sleeping on my time?" he hisses, yanking you upright. "That's a day's wages gone." Your protests die unspoken as he drags you back to the main bakehouse. The evening work is well underway, with Duncan and Harpreet kneading massive batches of dough. They avoid eye contact as the foreman shoves you toward an empty bench. "Since you've had your beauty sleep," he snarls, "you can handle the fancy breads yourself. Tea shop on Colmore Row wants 30 French rolls and a dozen Vienna loaves by morning. Recipes there." He jabs a flour-dusted finger toward a scrap of paper. "Mess it up and you're finished here." The task is both punishment and test. Fancy breads required skill and precision, usually reserved for more experienced bakers. Assigning them to you, exhausted and junior, is setting you up for failure. Harpreet catches your eye when the foreman turns away, mouthing, "Sorry." His distraction hadn't worked as planned. Instead of saving you trouble, he's landed you in deeper water. The recipe for French rolls is deceptively simple: flour, water, salt, yeast, milk, and butter. But the technique demands finesse, gentle handling to develop the gluten without toughening the crumb, precise shaping to create the characteristic split top. Vienna loaves are even trickier, requiring a special preparation called Vienna process that uses beer yeast instead of baker's yeast for a distinctive flavour. Your hands shake as you gather ingredients. The butter, a luxury in most bread recipes, has softened in the bakehouse heat, slipping greasily through your fingers as you measure it. The milk comes from a questionable jug that's been sitting for hours, already taking on a slightly sour smell in the constant warmth. "Don't waste that butter," snaps the foreman, watching your every move. "Costs more than you do." He wasn't exaggerating. In the 1870s, butter was an expensive commodity, particularly in urban areas. Using it in bread meant targeting wealthier customers who could pay premium prices. The fancy bread market was where bakeries made their real profits, charging 3 or 4 times what they could for standard loaves. You mix the enriched dough carefully, aware of the foreman's scrutiny. The addition of butter and milk transforms both the texture and the workability. It's softer, silkier under your hands, but also stickier and more prone to tearing. Every fold and turn requires a lighter touch than the brutal kneading of standard dough. As you work, a young boy enters the bakehouse, no older than 12, but with the weathered face of someone much older. His clothes are ragged, his thin arms mottled with burns and scars. "New apprentice," grunts the foreman by way of introduction. "Show him what to do, Duncan." Victorian bakeries operated on a strict hierarchy. At the bottom were apprentices, usually boys from poor families bound by contract to serve for years in exchange for learning the trade. Their conditions were often worse than adult workers, their treatment harsher. Duncan gestures the boy over, showing him how to stack wood for the oven. The child moves with the wary caution of someone used to blows, flinching when Duncan raises a hand to point. "What's your name, lad?" asks Harpreet kindly. "Tommy, sir." His voice is barely audible over the bakehouse noise. "Not sir, just Harpreet. We're all covered in the same flour here." You watch this interaction while shaping your French rolls, forming the dough into small ovals before making the distinctive central split with a floured finger. There's something heartbreaking about seeing a child enter this punishing trade, knowing what lies ahead for him: the burning lungs, the exhausted muscles, the life expectancy shortened with every sack of flour heaved. But apprenticeship was how the system perpetuated itself. Every master baker had once been an apprentice. Every journeyman had suffered through those early years. The shared misery created a bond, a fraternity of flour and fire that sustained men through unbearable conditions. Tommy is immediately put to work hauling coal for the ovens, his small frame struggling with weights that would challenge an adult. When he stumbles, spilling precious fuel, the foreman cuffs him hard across the ear. "Clumsy brat, pick up every piece." The boy doesn't cry, a telling sign that such treatment isn't new to him. Instead, he silently gathers the scattered coal, face impassive. By tomorrow, his hands will be blistered and raw. By next week, they'll have calluses to match the older bakers. By next year, if he survives, his lungs will have begun their slow deterioration. Your fancy dough has risen enough for shaping. The Vienna loaves require special attention, formed into oblong shapes with pointed ends, then slashed with a razor in distinctive patterns before baking. The resulting bread would have a crackling crust and a tender interior, commanding top prices in the tea shops and hotels of Birmingham. As you work, a commotion erupts at the bakehouse entrance. A well-dressed woman appears at the top of the stairs, her face pinched with distaste as she surveys the subterranean workspace. Behind her stands the master baker, his usual pomposity deflated in her presence. "As you can see, Mrs. Harding, we maintain the highest standards," he says, gesturing expansively. "The finest ingredients, skilled craftsmen." The woman, clearly a potential customer of significance, descends 2 steps, then stops, overwhelmed by the heat and flour dust. "You actually prepare food in these conditions?" Her voice drips with genteel horror. "All bakeries operate similarly, madam. The underground location maintains optimal temperature for fermentation." The master is sweating now, and not just from the ovens. A wealthy client's disapproval could be disastrous. Mrs. Harding's gaze sweeps across the grimy walls, the coal-blackened ovens, the exhausted workers, and finally settles on young Tommy, his face streaked with coal dust as he struggles with the oven door. "You employ children in this inferno." "Apprentices, madam. The traditional way of training. The boy is learning a valuable trade." Her lips thin to a bloodless line. "I think not, Mr. Barker. My hotel requires suppliers with more modern sensibilities. Good day." She turns and ascends the stairs, the master following with desperate placations. Her silk skirts disappear through the door, taking with her the promise of a lucrative contract. The master returns alone, face darkened with rage. His gaze falls on Tommy, still struggling with the oven. "You..." he snarls. "Your filthy appearance cost me the Grandview Hotel account. Get out of my sight." Tommy shrinks back, confusion and fear warring on his young face. "But sir, where should I..." "Did I ask for questions? Out." The boy looks desperately toward Duncan, who steps forward with uncharacteristic boldness. "Master, the lad's contracted for 3 years. His parents were paid £5 for him. You can't just..." "Another word and you'll join him." The master's face has turned an alarming purple. "This is my bakehouse. I decide who works and who doesn't." Tommy backs toward the stairs, eyes wide with panic. Being dismissed means more than losing a position. For a contracted apprentice, it could mean destitution or even prison for breach of agreement. Many such boys had no homes to return to, their families having essentially sold them to the trade. Harpreet moves subtly, slipping something into the boy's pocket as he passes. Money, perhaps, or food. A small mercy in a merciless situation. Tommy vanishes up the stairs, another casualty of the bakery business. The master storms out after him, leaving a wake of tense silence. The foreman, after ensuring his employer is truly gone, spits on the floor. "Bloody high and mighty customers," he mutters, "want their fancy bread but don't want to know how it's made. What did they expect? A bloody palace?" It was a common hypocrisy of Victorian society, a desire for the products of industrial labour without acknowledgement of the human cost. The same ladies who shuddered at bakehouse conditions happily consumed the bread, cakes and pastries produced there, maintaining the fiction that their food appeared by some clean, magical process. Your Vienna loaves are ready for the oven now, risen to perfect plumpness. As you score the tops with a razor, creating the signature pattern that would identify them as premium products, you realize how different these are from the standard loaves produced for factory workers. These breads, with their butter, milk and meticulous preparation, were destined for the breakfast tables of people who would never know your name, never imagine your working conditions, never connect their morning toast to your night of toil. The fancy bread goes into the oven under the foreman's critical eye. 12 minutes, not a second more, he instructs, and watch the colour. They want golden, not brown. This precision was another aspect of class division in Victorian baking. Working-class bread was functional fuel, but middle and upper-class bread was expected to meet aesthetic standards. The perfect colour, the right crust texture, the precise size and shape. Variations that would be ignored in a factory worker's loaf would render fancy bread unsaleable to wealthier customers. As your Vienna loaves bake, filling the bakehouse with a tantalizing aroma, the door opens again to admit a different kind of visitor. This woman wears no silk, no fashionable bonnet. Her practical dress and sturdy boots mark her as working class, but there's an authority in her bearing that commands attention. "Evening, gents," she says briskly. "I'm Mrs. Parker from the Bakers Association, here about union matters." The foreman steps forward, bristling. The master doesn't allow union talk in his bakehouse. "The master isn't here, is he?" She smiles thinly. "And I'm not leaving until I've had my say." By the 1870s, labour activism was reaching even traditionally isolated trades like baking. The Operative Bakers Association had begun organising workers advocating for better conditions and regulated hours. They faced fierce resistance from bakery owners who saw unions as threats to their control and profit margins. Mrs. Parker sets a stack of pamphlets on a workbench, ignoring the foreman's glower. "Manchester bakers won a 60-hour week last month," she announces. "No more 18-hour shifts, no more sleeping on flour sacks, proper breaks, proper sleeping quarters." The men exchange glances, hope and scepticism mingling in their exhausted faces. The idea of limited hours seems as fantastical as a fairy tale in this underground world of endless labour. "The master would never agree," mutters Duncan. "He'd replace us all first." "That's why you need to stand together," Mrs. Parker replies firmly. "Every bakery, every man, they can't replace all of you. Bread must be made, and they know it." The foreman edges toward the stairs, clearly contemplating fetching the master, but conflicted. He too suffers under the brutal hours, the dangerous conditions. He too has seen friends die young from baker's lung or exhaustion. "Take a pamphlet," urges Mrs. Parker. "Read it when you can. Meeting Sunday at the Bull's Head, 3 o'clock. Bring your fellows." She nods toward the oven. "Your fancy bread's burning, by the way." You lunge for the oven, yanking open the door to rescue the Vienna loaves. They're darker than ideal, but not ruined. A close save. When you turn back, Mrs. Parker is already heading up the stairs, having planted her seeds of discontent in fertile ground. The foreman retrieves the pamphlets, but instead of discarding them as expected, he silently slips one into his pocket before hiding the rest in a flour bin. His small act of rebellion speaks volumes about the changing times. Even those who enforced the system were beginning to question it. Your rescued Vienna loaves are cooling on racks, their burnished crusts crackling as they contract. Despite the slight overbaking, they look impressive, artisanal creations that would fetch good prices in the tea shops and hotels. There's a pride in producing such bread, even amid the exploitation and exhaustion. Not bad, admits the foreman grudgingly, inspecting your work. French rolls next, and be quick about it. We're behind schedule with all these interruptions. The night deepens outside the bakehouse, though you'd never know it in this timeless underground world. Your body has moved beyond ordinary fatigue into a strange, suspended state where exhaustion becomes almost hallucinatory. Your hands shape the French rolls automatically while your mind drifts in and out of awareness. You'll get used to it, says Duncan, noticing your struggle to stay alert. After a few months you can work in your sleep. Literally, if I last that long, you mutter. You might. Got the right build for it. Not too heavy. It's the big fellows who drop first. Hearts give out. He gestures toward Harpreet. He's been at it 15 years, one of the lucky ones. Harpreet looks up at the mention, his dark eyes sunken in a flower-whitened face. Lucky? My lungs rattle like a broken accordion. Can't walk upstairs without stopping to breathe. Call that lucky? You're alive, replies Duncan simply. Most who started with you aren't. This grim calculation, measuring success by mere survival, was the reality for Victorian bakers. In an industry with such high mortality, reaching 40 was an achievement. Reaching 50 was nearly miraculous. As the French rolls take shape under your tired hands, the bakehouse door opens once more. This time it's a woman in her 30s, plain-faced and practical, carrying a covered basket. "Evening, gentlemen," she calls cheerfully. "Brought your midnight meal." The atmosphere in the bakehouse transforms instantly. Backs straighten, faces brighten. Even the foreman manages something approaching a smile. "Mrs. Watson," he says with unusual warmth, "right on time as always." Mrs. Watson, apparently a familiar and welcome visitor, sets her basket on a clean corner of workbench and begins unpacking a large pot of tea, thick sandwiches wrapped in cloth and slices of pie in a tin. "Beef and onion tonight," she announces, "and plum pie from yesterday's fruit." This, you learn as the men gather eagerly around the food, is a baker's wife. Though not necessarily married to a baker, these women made small businesses of feeding bakehouse workers, preparing hearty meals that they delivered during the night shifts. For a few pence per week, deducted directly from wages, they provided the sustenance that kept men going through punishing hours. The food is simple but nourishing. Thick slices of beef between chunks of bread, well seasoned with mustard and onions. The tea is strong enough to stand a spoon in, sweetened heavily with sugar. For men working 16-hour shifts, such meals were essential fuel. "Tommy's all right," Mrs. Watson says quietly as she pours tea. "I've taken him in for now. My Jim was a baker's boy too before the consumption got him. Know what they go through." This casual mention of her dead son, presumably lost to tuberculosis, a common killer of bakery workers, is delivered without drama. Death was a constant companion in Victorian working-class life, particularly in trades like baking. Children were especially vulnerable, their developing lungs no match for years of flour dust and coal smoke. "The master won't take him back," warns the foreman between bites of sandwich. Mrs. Watson shrugs. "Other bakeries in Birmingham, or I'll train him up for cooking. Boy needs a trade, one way or another." This practical approach to tragedy was typical of working-class Victorian women who couldn't afford the luxury of extended grief. Life continued, bread needed baking, and orphaned apprentices needed new positions. The machinery of industrial Birmingham ground on, indifferent to individual suffering. You eat your sandwich gratefully, the first proper food you've had in nearly 24 hours of continuous work. The simple meal feels like a feast, restoring some small measure of energy to your depleted body. The brief respite from labour, perhaps 15 minutes total, is equally precious. All too soon, Mrs. Watson packs up her empty containers. "Same time tomorrow, gentlemen. Mind the ovens." With a cheerful wave, she departs, leaving behind the lingering scent of onions and tea to compete with the omnipresent smell of baking bread. "Back to it," orders the foreman, any momentary softening erased from his manner. "Those fancy breads won't bake themselves." As you return to your station, Harpreet appears at your elbow, speaking in a low voice meant only for you. Union meeting Sunday. You should come. Things are changing in the trade, slowly but changing. Manchester bakers got their 60-hour week. Liverpool's fighting for morning start times instead of midnight. Could happen here too. The idea seems almost too hopeful to contemplate. A world where bakers worked reasonable hours, where men didn't die at 40 with flour-choked lungs. Could such a future actually exist? "The master would never allow it," you whisper back, echoing Duncan's earlier doubt. Harpreet's smile is tired but genuine. Masters don't have a choice when all the journeymen stand together. Bread must be made, and only we know how to make it. This simple truth, that despite their exploitation, bakers held real power through their specialized knowledge, was the foundation of the growing labor movement. Bread was non-negotiable, the essential fuel of industrial Britain. Without bakers, the factories would literally grind to a halt as workers weakened from hunger. Your French rolls have risen perfectly, small pillows of dough ready for the oven. As you slide them onto the peel for baking, you find yourself contemplating Harpreet's words. The union meeting, the possibility of change, the idea that this brutal existence isn't inevitable. Seeds of hope taking root alongside the exhaustion. The rolls go into the oven's blazing heat, another batch of fancy bread destined for middle-class breakfast tables. Outside, Birmingham sleeps, unaware of the underground world that feeds it, but perhaps that world is finally stirring towards something resembling justice. One loaf, one baker, one union meeting at a time. Dawn creeps into Birmingham with reluctant fingers, grey light filtering through a perpetual veil of coal smoke. Your fancy breads, the French rolls and Vienna loaves, have emerged from the oven golden and fragrant, cooling on racks while the day's regular bread continues to bake. Your body has moved beyond exhaustion into a strange twilight state where time blurs and reality seems slightly bent around the edges. "Delivery time," announces the foreman, tossing you a coarse canvas bag. "Fancy bread route today. Colmore Row tea shops, then the hotels on New Street." Your heart sinks. After nearly 24 hours of continuous labour, you're now expected to haul bread across Birmingham, navigating morning crowds and discriminating customers. But refusal isn't an option. In the bakery hierarchy, delivery duty rotated among the junior workers, regardless of how long they'd been on shift. "Take these with you," says Harpreet quietly, slipping 2 small loaves into your bag when the foreman isn't looking. "One for you, one for trading. You'll need it." This simple kindness, sharing food in a world of scarcity, was the working-class solidarity that kept people alive in Victorian cities. Bakers traded bread for other necessities, creating informal networks of mutual aid beneath the official economy. Outside, Birmingham is stirring to life. Factory whistles pierce the dawn, summoning workers to their stations. Street vendors push carts into position, arranging wares for the day's trade. A milk cart rattles past, the hollow clank of bottles marking its progress down cobbled streets. The weight of your delivery, nearly 40 pounds of premium bread, already makes your shoulders burn as you navigate toward Colmore Row, home to Birmingham's more refined establishments. The contrast between the hellish bakehouse and these elegant tea shops is stark, say, rather than mere blocks apart. Your first stop is Peterson's Tea Room, a genteel establishment catering to ladies who lunch and businessmen seeking morning refreshment. The manager, a thin, supercilious man with waxed moustaches, inspects each loaf with insulting thoroughness before accepting delivery. "These are rather dark," he sniffs, examining a Vienna loaf. "Our customers prefer a lighter crust." You bite back a retort about how that same customer would faint dead away if they saw the conditions in which their precious bread was made. Instead, you maintain the expected servility, eyes downcast. "Sorry, sir, shall I tell the master baker? I suppose they'll have to do for today." He waves a dismissive hand. But mind you, Jenkins on Church Street provides a much superior product. We may transfer our custom there if quality doesn't improve. This casual threat, switching to a competitor, was the sword that hung constantly over bakery workers' heads. In 1870s Birmingham, bakeries operated on razor-thin margins, competing fiercely for commercial accounts. Losing a major customer could mean reduced hours or dismissed workers. With the delivery accepted, if grudgingly, you continue your route. The morning air, though fouled by industrial smoke, feels gloriously cool after the inferno of the bakehouse. Your lungs expand gratefully, temporarily free from the choking fog of flour dust. The streets grow increasingly crowded as you progress. Factory workers hurry past carrying their own bread wrapped in cloth, usually the cheaper seconds sold at reduced prices the previous evening. Street vendors call their wares hot pies, penny a pie, fresh herrings straight from the sea, matches, best quality matches. Victorian Birmingham was a cacophony of commerce, a perpetual marketplace where anything could be purchased from a cart or stall. Food vendors were especially numerous, serving a population that often lacked cooking facilities in their cramped lodgings. At the Grand Hotel on New Street, you make your largest delivery, 20 Vienna loaves for their breakfast service. The hotel kitchen is a revelation after the primitive bakehouse, clean, well lit, with actual ventilation and gleaming copper equipment. The chef, a Frenchman with an impressive moustache, accepts your delivery with professional courtesy. "Z bread, it is acceptable," he declares after breaking open a loaf to inspect the crumb. "Tell your master Z quality has improved." This faint praise feels like a triumph after Peterson's condescension. You nod gratefully, turning to leave, when the chef adds, "Wait, you look dead on your feet, boy." Before you can respond, he barks an order to a kitchen assistant, who returns with a mug of coffee and a plate, holding a small portion of eggs and bacon. The rich aroma makes your stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. "Eat," commands the chef. "Cannot have delivery boys fainting in my kitchen, bad for reputation." This unexpected kindness, from a stranger no less, nearly undoes you. You devour the food, standing up, the first hot meal you've had in days. The coffee, strong and sweet, sends a rush of energy through your depleted system. "Thank you, sir," you manage between bites. The chef shrugs. "Was baker's boy myself in Paris. Know how it is." He glances at your reddened, cracked hands. "Use lanolin at night. Helps with burning." With your deliveries to the upscale establishments completed, you still have a bag of standard loaves to distribute to smaller shops and boarding houses. This route takes you through Birmingham's less salubrious districts, where elegant facades give way to crowded tenements and narrow, rubbish-strewn alleys. On Bull Street, you make a delivery to a small shop selling penny buns and tea to factory workers. The proprietress, a stout woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense manner, counts the loaves carefully. "Too short again," she notes. "That's the third time this month." "I deliver what they give me, Mrs. Higgins," you reply truthfully. She fixes you with a shrewd gaze, and someone helps themselves along the way, I'll wager. "Not blaming you, lad. Just tell your master I pay for 12. I expect 12. Bread theft was a persistent problem, occurring at every stage from bakehouse to delivery. Sometimes it was other workers, sometimes street thieves, occasionally even the master bakers themselves, shorting deliveries to sell the extra elsewhere. In a world where bread was both staple food and valuable commodity, such theft was inevitable. As you continue your rounds, the social geography of Victorian Birmingham reveals itself through bread purchases. Wealthier households order individual loaves, delivered directly to their kitchens, where servants transform them into dainty sandwiches and toast points. Middle-class families buy from respectable shops, choosing between white and seconds, depending on their budget. Working-class customers crowd around street sellers or bakery back doors, purchasing day-old bread at reduced prices. At the very bottom of this bread hierarchy are the truly destitute, who gather behind bakeries at day's end, hoping for charitable distributions of unsold loaves. These bread lines were unofficial but ubiquitous in Victorian cities, a last defence against starvation for those who had fallen through the already threadbare social safety net. You witness one such gathering as you pass Simmons Bakery on your return route. A cluster of hollow-eyed women and children wait patiently near the back entrance, some clutching containers, others simply holding out bare hands. A baker's assistant appears with a tray of burnt or misshapen loaves, distributing them with mechanical efficiency. There's no conversation, no acknowledgement beyond the bare transaction. Bread given, bread received. The sight is sobering. For all the hardships of bakery work, at least you have guaranteed food. These people lack even that basic security, dependent on charity for their daily sustenance. Your delivery route nearly complete, you approach your final stop, a factory boarding house where workers rent beds by the shift, sharing rooms in rotation as day and night shifts change. These establishments provided minimal accommodation for migrant workers who couldn't afford proper lodgings, often housing a dozen men in space meant for 4. The boarding house keeper, a formidable woman with arms like ham hocks, counts your delivery with suspicious precision. "Right number today," she declares, "not like last week's short measure. Different delivery boy last week," you explain. "Humph, likely story. You're all thieving bastards far as I'm concerned." Despite her harsh words, she passes you a penny tip, a rare occurrence on the delivery route. "Get yourself something hot to drink. Look half dead." This gruff kindness from unexpected quarters was a feature of working-class Victorian life. Beneath the brutal economics and harsh conditions, networks of mutual support kept people going. A penny tip here, a cup of tea there, small mercies in an unmerciful world. With your deliveries finished, you begin the long walk back to the bakehouse. Your legs ache with each step, joints grinding like rusty hinges. The morning has advanced toward noon, the streets now crowded with shoppers, merchants, and the ever-present flow of industrial workers moving between factories. Near the market square, you encounter a scene typical of Victorian urban life, a hot bread seller with a mobile cart surrounded by customers. These vendors purchased bread directly from bakeries, then sold it still warm on street corners, adding a small markup for convenience. They were both competition and customers for established bakeries, occupying an ambiguous middle ground in the bread economy. The seller, an older man with a face like weathered leather, balances his trade with practiced skill, slicing loaves and making change without missing a beat. His patter flows continuously. Hot bread, fresh from the oven, warm your hands and fill your belly. Penny a slice, halfpenny for the crust. You pause to watch, professional curiosity momentarily overcoming your exhaustion. The bread looks decent, likely from Wilson's Bakery on the high street, known for their reliable, if unspectacular, loaves. The customers are mostly labourers grabbing a quick meal between jobs, or factory workers on their brief dinner break. You there, baker boy. The vendor has noticed your delivery bag. How's trade at Barker's? Still using that American flour? The casual question carries deeper implications. Bakers knew each other's business intimately, which suppliers they used, which corners they cut, which adulterants they favoured. It was both professional network and intelligence gathering, essential in the cutthroat competition of Victorian bread making. Good enough, you reply non-committally. American flour makes a stronger loaf. The vendor nods sagely. When it's not cut with bean flour, old Barker's been known to stretch his supplies, hasn't he? He winks conspiratorially. Not that anyone's innocent in this trade. We do what we must. This casual acknowledgement of adulteration was telling. By the 1870s, bread purity had become a relative concept rather than an absolute. Bakers didn't ask if their competitors adulterated, only how much and with what. The economic pressures of industrial baking had normalized practices that would horrify modern consumers. Continuing toward the bakehouse, you pass a street corner where a constable has detained a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, clutching half a loaf of bread. The child's face is streaked with tears and grime, his clothes ragged and several sizes too large. Caught him red-handed, the constable explains to a small crowd of onlookers. Snatched it from Gilmore's delivery cart. The penalty for such theft could be severe. Even a child might face imprisonment or transportation for stealing something as valuable as bread. Victorian justice showed little leniency for crimes of poverty, particularly when they threatened the sanctity of commerce. Without consciously deciding to intervene, you find yourself stepping forward. "He's mine," you call to the constable. "My brother sent him to fetch bread and he got confused about paying first." The constable looks sceptical, but the boy, quick-witted despite his distress, immediately plays along. "Sorry, Charlie, didn't mean to cause trouble." "You'll vouch for him then?" asks the constable, clearly relieved at the prospect of resolving the situation without paperwork. "Yes, sir. Won't happen again." You produce a penny from your meagre store of tips for the bread. The constable releases the boy with a warning cuff to the ear. As soon as you're around the corner, the child gives you a gap-toothed grin. "Thanks, mister. Thought I was bound for the workhouse, sure. Be more careful next time," you advise, knowing the futility of such warnings. In a world where hunger was constant and food expensive, theft was often a matter of survival rather than moral failing. The boy tilts his head, studying your flour-dusted appearance. "You really a baker?" "At Barker's, on Bridge Street. Hard work, that." He says this with the worldly wisdom of a child who has never known anything but hard work. "Me dad was a baker 'fore his lungs gave out. Died when I was 6. This casual mention of parental death, delivered without self-pity or drama, was typical of Victorian street children. Mortality was so common among working-class parents that orphaned or abandoned children formed a significant underclass in most industrial cities. "What's your name?" you ask. "Billy. Some call me Billy Crumb on account of I'm always after bread." He grins again, displaying his missing teeth. "Best thing for hungry bellies. Here." You retrieve one of the small loaves Harpreet gave you earlier. "Try not to steal next time. Magistrates aren't always understanding." The boy accepts the bread with solemn gravity, tucking it inside his ragged jacket. God bless you, mister. I'll remember this. Such interactions, brief moments of humanity amid the grinding machinery of Victorian commerce, were the small victories that made urban life bearable. As Billy disappears into the warren of side streets, you feel a fleeting satisfaction that outweighs your bone-deep exhaustion. Back at the bakehouse, you descend once more into the underground world of flour and fire. The contrast between street and bakery, between open air, however smoke-filled, and the stifling heat of the ovens, hits you like a physical blow. The day shift is in full swing, with different workers now manning the benches. Your night crew, Duncan, Harpreet and the foreman, have presumably gone home for their brief rest before returning at 11. New faces regard you with the vacant exhaustion typical of bakery workers, barely acknowledging your return. "Delivery boy's back," calls someone. "Master wants to see you." Your heart sinks. Summons to the master's office rarely boded well for junior workers. Had someone complained about the bread? Had the boarding house keeper reported you despite the correct count? The master sits behind his desk as before, but now he's accompanied by a different visitor. A heavy-set man in expensive but flour-dusted clothes. Another baker, by the look of him, and a prosperous one. "This is Mr. Wilson," says your master without preamble. "He's short-handed at his New Street bakery and needs an experienced man. I've recommended you." The surprise must show on your face, because the master adds impatiently, "It's a step up, boy. Better wages, newer equipment. You'd be a fool to refuse." Mr. Wilson studies you with calculating eyes. "My foreman says he saw you making deliveries, says you're prompt and the customers don't complain. That's rare enough in this trade." "Thank you, sir," you manage, mind racing. Is this good fortune or some kind of trick? "Starts tonight," continues Wilson. 11 sharp. New Street Bakery, behind the post office. Know it? You nod, having passed the place on deliveries. It's larger than Barker's, with a proper shop front rather than just wholesale operations. The promotion, for it is clearly that, seems to have materialized from nowhere. Only as you leave the office, officially released from Barker's employment, does the reality dawn on you. The union pamphlets, Mrs. Parker's visit, the master's sudden generosity is simply removing a potential troublemaker before union talk can spread through his bakehouse. Outside, in the momentary privacy of the street, you allow yourself a smile. Intended or not, the transfer feels like victory, recognition of your skills, better conditions, perhaps even slightly shorter hours. In the brutal economy of Victorian baking, such small improvements were worth celebrating. As you walk toward your lodgings and the few precious hours of sleep before your new position begins, Birmingham's industrial symphony continues around you. The clatter of carts, the hiss of steam, the perpetual background roar of commerce and production. Within this urban machine, bread remains the essential fuel, and you, one of the countless nameless workers who provide it. Your body aches with exhaustion, your lungs burn from flour dust, your hands are cracked and blistered, but you've survived your first days as a Victorian baker, a trade that kills many before they've properly learned it. Whether you'll beat the odds and live past 40 remains to be seen. But for now, the simple fact of survival feels like achievement enough. Wilson's Bakery is a revelation. Located on New Street behind the post office, it occupies a building purpose-built for bread production rather than a converted cellar. The main bakehouse has actual windows, narrow and grime-streaked, but allowing shafts of natural light to penetrate the flour-dusted air. The ceiling is high enough that workers don't need to stoop, and a crude ventilation system draws some of the worst heat and coal smoke up through metal ducts. paradise compared to Barker's hellhole, comments an older baker when he sees your wide-eyed assessment. Wilson's one of the progressive ones, believes bakers might live past 40 if they can occasionally breathe. That's not to say conditions are good by any modern standard. The work remains brutally physical, the hours punishingly long, but the small improvements, light, air, slightly more space, feel like luxuries after your experience at Barker's underground sweatshop. Your new position is as a second hand, one step up from the most junior workers, reflecting your demonstrated skill with fancy breads. The wage is 24 shillings weekly instead of 20, a significant increase in a trade where pennies often made the difference between adequacy and deprivation. The night shift begins as before at 11, but Wilson's operation has a more organised system. The first sponge is already prepared by a day worker, saving the initial mixing step. Equipment is cleaner, ingredients better sorted, the workflow more efficient. Even the foreman at grey-haired veteran named Phillips seems less tyrannical than his counterpart at Barker's Tainsais. "New man, eh?" he says, looking you over with professional assessment. "Heard you've got a hand for Vienna bread. We do a lot of that here. Hotel contracts." The other workers introduce themselves with the laconic brevity of men who conserve energy for the tasks ahead. There's Thomas, the first hand, a tall, cadaverous man with hollow cheeks and skeletal fingers. James and Peter, fellow second hands, both in their 20s, but already showing the characteristic stoop of career bakers. Young Arthur, the newest apprentice, barely 13 and wide-eyed with anxiety on his first night shift. Most telling are the older men, or rather their scarcity. Among the dozen bakers working the night shift, only Foreman Phillips and one other man appear to be over 35. The brutal reality of bakers' life expectancy is written in this demographic void. The night's work begins with the usual routine of mixing, kneading and shaping. The dough is familiar under your hands, but you quickly notice differences in Wilson's operation. The flour is more consistent without the suspicious adulteration you experienced at Barker's. The recipes are standardized with actual written instructions rather than haphazard oral directions. "Wilson believes in quality," explains Thomas as you work side by side. "Says adulteration's false economy. Customers taste the difference and take their business elsewhere." This philosophy, that honest bread could be good business, was still relatively rare in 1870s Birmingham, where price competition drove many bakeries to cut corners. Wilson's approach represented an emerging counter-trend, particularly for establishments serving middle and upper-class customers who could afford to pay for purity. As the night progresses, you observe another difference at Wilson's. The men occasionally pause to rest. Not long breaks, just moments to stretch aching backs or massage cramped hands. Such small mercies were unthinkable at Barker's, where constant motion was the only acceptable state. Around 3 a.m, during one such brief pause, you notice Thomas discreetly pull a small tin from his pocket. He extracts a pill, swallows it dry with the practiced motion of habit, then tucks the tin away before the foreman can notice. "Lung medicine," he explains in a whisper, seeing your curious glance. "Doctor says I've got the first stages of consumption. These pills help with the coughing fits." Tuberculosis, consumption in Victorian parlance, was endemic among bakery workers, their lungs weakened by years of flour dust and coal smoke. What's striking isn't Thomas's condition, but the fact he can afford a doctor's visit and medicine on a baker's wages. "Wilson pays our medical society dues," Thomas continues, noting your surprise. "6p a week from our wages, 6p matched by him, gives us access to the dispensary on Broad Street when we need it." This rudimentary health insurance, the friendly society or sick club model, was gaining traction in more progressive Victorian businesses. It represented an early recognition that workers' health had economic value, even if humanitarian concerns remained secondary. The bakehouse settles into its rhythm as the night deepens, the perpetual dance of mixing, rising, shaping and baking that produced Birmingham's daily bread. Despite the improved conditions, the physical toll remains severe. Your arms burn with the effort of kneading. Your lower back throbs from hours of bending over work tables. Your lungs strain against the omnipresent flour dust. Around 4, young Arthur stumbles, nearly dropping a tray of shaped dough. Foreman Phillips steadies him with surprising gentleness. "Sit down, lad. Catch your breath." The boy sinks onto a flour sack, face alarmingly pale beneath its dusting of white. "Sorry, sir. Got dizzy for a moment." "Happens to all of us first few weeks," Phillips replies. "Body's not used to the work yet." What goes unspoken is the brutal truth. Many bodies never adapt. The physical demands of Victorian bakery work exceeded human capacity for sustainable labour, a reality reflected in the trade's appalling mortality statistics. Those who survived either possessed exceptional constitutions or learned to pace themselves through hard-won experience. "Drink this," says Thomas, passing the boy a mug of water with something mixed in. Baker's Friend, bicarbonate and ginger, settles the stomach. Such home remedies circulated among trades where occupational illness was common but medical care rare or unaffordable. Victorian workers developed extensive folk pharmacopoeia to address the specific ailments of their professions, from baker's lung to painter's colic to miner's black spit. As dawn approaches, the bakehouse fills with the rich aroma of fresh bread, the daily miracle that somehow justifies the night's suffering. The first batches emerge golden from the ovens, cooling on racks, while the next round takes their place in the perpetual cycle of production. Wilson himself makes an appearance as the morning deliveries are prepared, a rare sight at this hour. Most master bakers delegated early supervision to foremen, appearing only after respectable business hours. Wilson, however, inspects the night's output with professional scrutiny, breaking open loaves to check the crumb, testing crusts for proper crackling resistance. "The Vienna loaves for the Grand Hotel look especially good," he comments, nodding toward a rack of the distinctive oblong breads. "Who shaped these?" Foreman Phillips gestures toward you. "New man, sir. Came from Barker's with experience in fancy bread." Wilson studies you with newfound interest. "Good technique. Keep it up." The brief praise, delivered without sentimentality, nonetheless warms you more than might seem reasonable. Recognition of skill was rare in a trade where workers were often viewed as interchangeable muscle. As the morning shift workers arrive to take over the bakehouse, you and the other night men prepare for delivery duties. Wilson's operation divides these tasks more systematically than Barker's, each baker responsible for specific routes rather than random assignments. Your allocated delivery is to several hotels and tea shops in the commercial district, carrying primarily fancy breads and rolls. The weight is substantial, perhaps 50 pounds in your basket, but the route is compact, minimizing the distance you'll need to walk with this burden. Outside, Birmingham's morning presents its usual face. Coal smoke hanging low in the dawn light, early workers hurrying toward factories, street vendors setting up for the day's trade. Your body aches with familiar fatigue, but there's a different quality to it. The honest exhaustion of hard work, rather than the crushing depletion you experienced at Barker's. Your first delivery stop is the Grand Hotel, where you encounter the same French chef who showed you kindness on your previous route. He recognizes you immediately. "Ah, the boy from Barker's. Now you work for Wilson, yes? Much better." He inspects the Vienna loaves with professional approval. "These are correct. Good oven spring. Proper scoring." As he signs for the delivery, he adds conversationally, "You know there is meeting Sunday for Bakers' Union?" The casual mention of union activity, once whispered furtively, signals changing times in the trade. By the mid-1870s, labour organisation was moving from shadows into open discussion, at least in more progressive establishments. "At the Bull's Head, you confirm. 3 o'clock. Good. Many will attend, I think. Even my kitchen bakers." He taps his nose conspiratorially. "Change comes, yes? Slowly, but it comes." This sentiment, cautious optimism about improving conditions, echoes throughout your delivery route. At Jennings' tea room, the manager mentions that her cousin, a journeyman baker, has joined the Operative Bakers Association. At Whitmore's hotel, you glimpse a union pamphlet partially hidden beneath the kitchen counter. At Patterson's bakery, where you deliver surplus dough for their own baking, the shopgirl whispers that her father, a master baker himself, has begun closing on Sundays to give his men a full day's rest. These small signs of change, scattered through Birmingham's commercial district, represent the first stirrings of reform in one of Britain's most exploitative trades. The 1870s marked a turning point when decades of suffering finally began translating into organised resistance and gradual improvement. Your deliveries complete, you begin the walk back to your lodgings and the precious few hours of sleep before the next shift begins. Passing through a working-class neighbourhood, you notice a crowd gathered outside a corner shop. Mothers with young children, elderly couples, factory workers on their dinner break. They're listening to a well-dressed man standing on a wooden crate, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "The bread you feed your families is poisoned," he declares, holding up a loaf like evidence in a trial, "adulterated with alum, chalk, bone meal, substances that rob your children of nourishment even as they seem to eat their fill." This is a food safety campaigner, one of many who emerged in the 1870s as public awareness of adulteration scandals grew. Their advocacy would eventually lead to the landmark Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875, establishing the first meaningful regulations against food fraud. "The proof is in the health of our communities," continues the speaker, gesturing toward the pale-faced children in his audience. "Rickets, stunted growth, digestive complaints, all connected to the false economy of adulterated bread. The poor pay twice, first in money for inferior food, then in health destroyed by chemical additives." The crowd murmurs in agreement, many nodding with the weary knowledge of personal experience. Victorian working-class communities understood the health impacts of poor nutrition intimately, even if they lacked the scientific terminology to describe it. "Ask your baker if his bread is pure," challenges the speaker. "Demand to know what goes into the food your children eat." The honest tradesman will welcome such questions. Only the adulterators fear transparency. You slip past the gathering, feeling a complex mix of guilt and vindication. Having participated in adulteration at Barker's, however unwillingly, you understand both the economic pressures that drove the practice and its human consequences. Wilson's commitment to purer bread seems not just ethically superior, but increasingly aligned with public sentiment. At your lodging house, a slightly better establishment than you could afford on Barker's wages, you encounter another baker returning from his shift. His hollow cough and stooped posture mark him instantly as a veteran of the trade, though he can't be much past 35. "Wilson's, ain't you, sons?" he asks, recognizing the flour dust pattern peculiar to each bakehouse. Heard they're not bad. Got proper ventilation, some say. Better than most, you confirm. Where do you work? Or Simmons, on Market Street. He coughs again, a wet, rattling sound that speaks of damaged lungs. Underground place. No windows, no air. Doing it 20 years now. 20 years in a Victorian bakehouse might as well be a life sentence. Few survived that long without significant health damage, evidence of which stands before you in this man's wasted frame and laboured breathing. You going to the union meeting Sunday, you ask? He nods, then glances around habitually, checking for eavesdroppers, an ingrained caution from years when union activity could mean instant dismissal. Wouldn't miss it. Things are moving now. Manchester got their hours reduced. Liverpool's pushing for morning starts instead of midnight shifts. Will it really change anything? The question emerges from your deepest doubts. Can a trade so fundamentally exploitative ever truly reform? Has to, he replies simply. We're dying too fast otherwise. Even the masters are starting to see it. Dead bakers don't make bread. This grim pragmatism, recognizing that self-preservation aligned with economic necessity, underpinned much of Victorian labour reform. Improvements came not primarily from humanitarian impulses, but from the gradual recognition that workers' health represented economic value. Some changes already happening, continues your neighbour, warming to the topic. Medical officers inspecting bakeries now, newspapers publishing which shops use adulterants, public starting to care what goes in their bread. He's referring to the public health movement gaining momentum in the 1870s, spearheaded by medical professionals increasingly concerned about industrial conditions. Their investigations into bakeries, particularly the underground establishments with no ventilation or sanitation, generated sensational headlines that shocked middle-class readers. Dr. Hassal's reports in The Lancet named specific bakeries using alum and chalk, he continues, sent their business plummeting. That's hitting masters where it hurts, right in the pocket. The Lancet reports represented a new approach to food safety, using scientific analysis and public shame to force change where regulation had failed. By identifying specific businesses and their adulterants, these exposés created market consequences for dishonest practices. Get some sleep, he advises as you reach your door. You look dead on your feet. First months are always worse till your body adapts, if it adapts. This casual acknowledgement of mortality, the if that haunted every baker's career, was simply realistic in a trade where making it to 40 was considered a triumph of survival, yet even this grim prognosis contained a hint of the changing times. First months are worst, implied a future beyond the immediate suffering, a career that might continue, improvements that might come. Inside your small room, you collapse onto the narrow bed without bothering to remove your flour-covered clothes. Your body feels simultaneously leaden with fatigue and humming with pain. Aching joints, burning lungs, raw hands. Sleep ambushes you between one breath and the next, dragging you under into dreams filled with dough and fire. You wake disoriented in late afternoon, sunlight slanting through your grimy window at an unfamiliar angle. For a moment, panic grips you. Have you overslept? Missed your shift? Then reality reassembles itself. Wilson's Bakery, night shift, still hours before you need to return. Rising stiffly, you assess your physical state with the new awareness of someone who has begun to understand the true cost of their trade, the persistent tickle in your throat that signals the earliest stage of baker's lung, the calluses forming on your palms, replacing the raw blisters of your first days, the deepening stoop to your shoulders, the body already reshaping itself around the demands of the work. Are these adaptations or early warnings, the signs of a body learning to survive or beginning its slow surrender? In the Victorian bakery trade, this distinction often became clear only in retrospect, when a worker either reached improbable middle age or joined the statistics of premature mortality. Outside, Birmingham continues its industrial symphony, factory chimneys belching smoke into the perpetual haze that hangs over the city. Somewhere within this urban maze, union organisers prepare for Sunday's meeting, medical officers compile reports on unsanitary bakeries, and journalists investigate the latest adulteration scandal. The machinery of reform turns slowly but perceptibly, grinding toward a future where bread might be made without sacrificing those who make it. Sunday arrives with uncharacteristic sunshine breaking through Birmingham's perpetual industrial haze. For the first time since beginning bakery work, you have a full day without labour. Wilson's operation, progressive by the standards of the trade, closes from Saturday evening until Sunday night. This brief respite from the punishing schedule feels almost disorienting, your body clock so thoroughly trained to nocturnal work that daylight hours now seem strange and unfamiliar. The Bull's Head pub on Bradford Street is already crowded when you arrive shortly before 3. The back room, reserved for the union meeting, buzzes with conversation. Dozens of men in their flour-dusted Sunday best, faces bearing the common marks of their trade. The hollow cheeks, the prematurely aged skin, the distinctive stoop of shoulders bent too long over kneading troughs. You spot familiar faces among the crowd. Harpreet from Barker's nods in recognition, a faint smile breaking his normally stoic expression. Thomas from Wilson's raises a glass in greeting. Even Foreman Phillips is present, though he keeps to the margins, his presence both surprising and significant. When foremen, traditionally the enforcers of masters' harsh policies, began attending union meetings, it signalled shifting power dynamics in the trade. "Quite a turnout," comments a voice beside you. You turn to find Mrs. Parker, the union organiser who visited Barker's bakehouse. Today she wears a formal dress rather than her working clothes, but her direct gaze and no-nonsense manner remain unchanged. "Word's spreading. 3 months ago we'd have been lucky to get 15 men. The room quiets as a tall, thin man steps onto a wooden crate at the front. He introduces himself as Joseph Thorpe, secretary of the Birmingham branch of the Operative Bakers Association. His sunken cheeks and wheezing breath mark him as a career baker, though his articulate speech suggests education beyond what most workers received. "Brothers," he begins, voice surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance, "we gather today to continue our fight for the most basic dignities, reasonable hours, safe conditions, and bread untainted by adulterants that poison both maker and consumer." A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. These weren't radical demands in the context of 1870s labour politics, merely the extension to bakers of protections already granted to many other trades. Reports from Manchester confirm the success of their limited hours campaign, continues Thorpe. Bakers there now work no more than 12 hours daily, with a full day's rest on Sunday. He pauses as appreciative murmurs rise from the crowd. Liverpool follows close behind, with discussions of shifting start times from midnight to early morning, allowing men to work with God's light rather than in perpetual darkness. The achievements he describes, trivial by modern standards, represented revolutionary improvements for Victorian bakers accustomed to 16 or 18-hour shifts in subterranean workrooms. The very concept of limited working hours, of time existing beyond labour, was transformative in a trade where work and life had traditionally been indistinguishable. Birmingham must not fall behind, Thorpe declares. We propose a coordinated campaign across all major bakeries, a unified demand for 12-hour maximum shifts, mandatory Sunday closing, and weekly health inspections of all premises. This last point, health inspections, reflected growing public concern about bakery conditions following scandalous exposés in medical journals and newspapers. The invisible suffering of bakers had finally become visible to middle-class consumers, creating unprecedented leverage for reform. Unity is essential, emphasizes Thorpe. When one bakery strikes alone, the master simply replaces them. When all strike together, bread production stops throughout Birmingham. No master can replace every skilled baker simultaneously. This strategy, coordinated action across an entire trade, represented a maturing of labour tactics beyond the isolated, easily crushed strikes of earlier decades. By the 1870s, bakers were learning from successful campaigns in other industries, adopting their methods and organisational structures. After Thorpe's opening speech, various bakers rise to share reports from their establishments. The picture that emerges shows an industry in transition, some bakeries still operating under brutal conditions reminiscent of earlier decades, others beginning to implement reforms in response to market pressures and changing public sentiment. A baker from Johnson's describes newly installed ventilation systems that have reduced coal smoke in their work area. Another, from Simmons, reports that their underground bakehouse is being relocated to a ground floor facility with windows, a fundamental improvement in working conditions. A third describes how his master has stopped using alum after losing customers to competitors advertising pure bread. Each small victory receives enthusiastic approval from the crowd. These incremental improvements scattered across Birmingham's bakeries suggest a turning tide, the first hints of a future where the trade might become something other than a slow death sentence. The meeting continues with practical matters, dues collection, communication networks, strategies for approaching resistant master bakers. You contribute your own observations about the differences between Barker's traditional operation and Wilson's more progressive approach, providing concrete examples of how improved conditions benefit both workers and product quality. As the formal proceedings conclude and the gathering shifts towards social drinking, you find yourself in conversation with an older baker, a man in his 50s, ancient by the standards of the trade. His survival to such an age marks him as exceptional, a living testament to either remarkable constitution or unusual working conditions. 40 years I've been baking, he tells you, nursing a half pint of mild ale. Started as an apprentice when Victoria was newly crowned. Seen it all? I have. How did you survive so long, you ask, the question emerging from genuine wonder. Few bakers from his generation lived to tell their tales. He chuckles, a sound that transitions into a rattling cough. Luck, partly, but also adaptation. Learned to pace myself, to breathe through wet cloth when sifting flour, to stand so my back didn't break. He gestures toward the crowded room, and I wasn't afraid to fight for better. Been to every union meeting since 51. Got fired for it twice, but kept at it. This perspective, spanning decades of the trade's evolution, offers a rare glimpse of how far things had already come. Despite the continuing hardships, the 1870s represented significant improvement over the unregulated exploitation of earlier Victorian decades. "It's changing faster now," the old baker continues. "Machinery coming in. Chemical yeast replacing sourdough, steam ovens instead of coal, won't recognise the trade in another 20 years. His prediction would prove accurate. The late Victorian period saw accelerating technological change in baking, with mechanisation gradually replacing the most punishing manual labour. Dough mixers, mechanical dividers, and steam-powered ovens were already appearing in larger commercial bakeries, harbingers of a more industrialised future. Good changes or bad, you ask? He considers this thoughtfully. Both, I expect. Machines save backs but take jobs. Chemical additives may be safer than the old adulterants, but are they truly food? Progress isn't simple. He drains his glass. But I'll tell you this, no baker should die at 40 from his trade. If machines and chemicals prevent that, I'm for them. This pragmatic view, valuing survival over tradition, was common among workers who had experienced the full brutality of Victorian baking firsthand. For them, romantic notions of artisanal craft held little appeal compared to the prospect of reaching old age with functioning lungs. As the meeting disbands, you step outside into the late afternoon sunshine. Birmingham's Sunday quiet, the relative hush of reduced industrial activity, feels almost eerie after the constant clamour of weekdays. Factory chimneys still smoke, but less aggressively. Streets, normally thronged with carts and wagons, are navigable on foot. Even the air seems marginally cleaner, though the perpetual coal smoke haze never truly dissipates. Walking back toward your lodgings, you pass a small bakery with a prominent sign in its window, "Pure bread, no alum, no chalk, no adulterants." Such advertising would have been unnecessary a decade earlier, when adulteration was universal and unremarkable. Its appearance now signals changing consumer awareness, the public beginning to value food purity enough to pay premium prices for it. Nearby, a more traditional bakery sports a different notice: fresh bread all day, baked on premises. This too represents evolving market conditions. As concerns about bakehouse conditions spread through newspaper exposés, consumers increasingly distinguished between bread made in visible, above-ground bakeries and that produced in unseen cellars. Transparency itself had become a selling point. Even the physical infrastructure of Birmingham's baking industry shows signs of transformation. New bakeries increasingly occupy ground floor premises with windows and ventilation, partly from growing regulatory pressure, partly from bakers' own demands, partly from changing consumer expectations. The subterranean bakehouse, though still common, is gradually becoming obsolete. These physical changes paralleled regulatory evolution. The 1870s saw unprecedented government intervention in food safety, culminating in the landmark Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875. This legislation, while imperfectly enforced, established the principle that consumers had a right to unadulterated food, creating legal tools to combat the worst excesses of bread adulteration. Equally significant were the public health acts of the same period, which empowered local authorities to inspect workplaces for sanitary conditions. Bakeries, long exempted from oversight that applied to other industries, increasingly faced scrutiny from medical officers with power to demand improvements or close dangerous establishments. The technological frontier was advancing as well. Passing Harrison's agricultural implement works, you glimpse through open doors a mechanical dough mixer under construction, a cast-iron behemoth designed to replace the punishing manual labour that broke bakers' bodies. Such machines, though still rare in smaller establishments, pointed toward a future where the most physically destructive aspects of the trade might be mechanised. Even bread recipes and methods were evolving. The Vienna process, using compressed yeast instead of traditional sourdough, was revolutionizing commercial baking, allowing faster production with more consistent results. The aerated bread company had pioneered chemical leavening methods that eliminated fermentation entirely. These innovations, controversial among traditionalists, nonetheless offered pathways to bread production that required less brutal human labour. By the time you reach your lodgings, the sun is setting over Birmingham's industrial skyline, casting long shadows across soot-stained buildings. Your next shift at Wilson's begins in a few hours, the familiar cycle resuming after this brief respite. Yet something has changed, some subtle shift in perspective that makes the work ahead seem less like an inescapable sentence and more like a temporary condition in a changing industry. That night, as you work through your shift at Wilson's, you notice small improvements with new awareness. The ventilation ducts that reduce coal smoke, the higher ceilings that allow heat to rise away from workers, the scheduled rest periods that prevent complete exhaustion. These features, unremarkable a week ago, now appear as tangible evidence of the trade's evolution. More telling are the conversations among your fellow bakers. Union meeting attendance is discussed openly rather than in whispers. Men compare conditions at different establishments without fear of reprisal. Even Foreman Phillips participates, offering his own assessment of how Wilson's might implement the 12-hour shift maximum being adopted in Manchester. "The master's not against it in principle," he remarks while supervising the Vienna bread production. "Says well-rested men make better bread. It's just working out the scheduling that's complicated." This pragmatic approach, framing worker welfare as quality control, typified progressive thinking among the more enlightened master bakers of the period. They recognized, however slowly, that the traditional model of working men to death and replacing them was neither humane nor economically optimal. As dawn approaches, bringing your shift toward its conclusion, Thomas appears at your station with unexpected news. "Wilson's installing a mechanical mixer next month," he reports excitedly. "American model with steam power, does the work of 4 men without getting tired." The announcement generates mixed reactions among the bakers, enthusiasm for reduced physical labour competing with anxiety about potential job losses. This tension between technological progress and employment security would define much of the trade's subsequent evolution, as machines gradually assumed the most punishing aspects of bread production. "Will they need fewer men?" asks young Arthur, voicing the concern foremost in many minds. "Wilson says no," replies Thomas. "Same number of men, but focused on shaping and baking rather than mixing. Says it'll let us make more fancy breads where the real profit is." This reassurance, whether sincere or merely expedient, reflects the complex reality of mechanization in Victorian industries. While some innovations indeed eliminated jobs, others transformed them or created new roles. The most forward-thinking employers sought to harness technology for competitive advantage without triggering the worker resistance that might accompany mass dismissals. By the time your shift ends, morning light filters through Wilson's windows, illuminating flower motes dancing in the air, still present despite improved ventilation, still coating lungs with their silica payload. The fundamental hazards of the trade remain, mitigated but not eliminated by incremental reforms and technological advances. Yet, as you complete your deliveries and head toward your lodgings, the future seems marginally brighter than it did just days ago. The union's growing strength, the spread of regulatory oversight, the technological innovations appearing in progressive bakeries all suggest a trajectory toward improvement, however gradual and uneven. that trajectory would indeed continue through the remaining decades of the Victorian era. By the century's end, much of what defined the trade in the 1870s had evolved beyond recognition. Mechanical mixers and dividers replaced the most punishing manual labour. Above-ground bakeries, with proper ventilation, became the norm rather than the exception. Working hours shortened to more sustainable levels, with shifts rarely exceeding 12 hours and Sunday closing increasingly common. Food safety regulation matured as well, with more effective enforcement mechanisms and scientific testing methods. Bread adulteration, though never entirely eliminated, declined significantly as consumer awareness grew and legal penalties increased. The most dangerous additives, alum chief among them, largely disappeared from commercial production. Most significantly, baker mortality improved. While the trade remained physically demanding, the combination of better conditions, reduced hours, and mechanization of the most damaging tasks meant that bakers increasingly survived to see 40, 50, even 60 years of age. The profession gradually ceased being a virtual death sentence, becoming instead a sustainable, if still challenging, lifelong occupation. For the individual baker in 1875, these future improvements remained distant prospects rather than immediate realities. The daily experience still involved punishing labour, harmful conditions, and uncertain longevity. Yet the seeds of change were visibly sprouting, offering tangible hope that the trade might eventually become something other than a slow form of suicide. As you drift towards sleep in your narrow lodging house bed, your body aching with familiar pains, but your mind processing new possibilities, Birmingham's industrial symphony continues outside. The clanging of metal, the hiss of steam, the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestones. Within this urban cacophony, the sound of bread being made remains constant, the essential industry that feeds all others, gradually being transformed by the same forces reshaping Victorian society itself. The bakeries of the future, with their machinery, ventilation, regulated hours, and safety standards, exist now only as prototypes and proposals, glimpsed in union meetings and progressive establishments like Wilson's. Yet their outlines are becoming clearer, their eventual arrival more certain. The Victorian baker's harsh world is beginning its slow evolution towards something more sustainable, more humane, a transformation as gradual but as inevitable as the rising of well-made dough. And as you finally surrender to exhaustion, your flour-dusted clothes still carrying the yeasty aroma of the bakehouse, you become part of that evolution, one more baker navigating the transition between bread-making's brutal past and its more promising future. Your eyes grow heavy, your breathing deepens, and you slip away into dreams no longer filled with fire and drudgery, but with the simple satisfaction of work that might someday be just work, not a sentence to early death.